Hey there, all of my creative and crafty friends. Welcome back to my channel. So today we're doing a video talking about paint mixing again, kind of on the heels of the videos I've already done. So initially we did our color wheel, and then we did our complementary colors and our tint, tone, and shade. And I realized that it would be helpful to have a video showing you how to use those things and what the difference is when you're trying to decide what colors you want to mix, how you want to shade things, all that jazz. I apologize that it's taken so long. I actually intended to have this video out at the beginning of February. However, I ended up with the flu for 2 solid weeks, and I'm still kind of recovering from it a little bit. And then my kid also ended up with the flu. So it has been a really kind of a rough month. So between that and starting a new job, it's just been a little chaotic, but we are all healthy now. We're getting better. And so here we are. We're going to do this video, and I hope you find it helpful and enjoy it. So initially, when I wanted to do a demo, I was trying to decide if I wanted to do the cube or the sphere. And so I ended up settling on the cube for the sort of demonstrative purposes today. And the whole idea is about the shading. So when I did the tint, tone, and shade video, I did mention that, you know, we kind of use these different techniques for different reasons. And that's what I'm hoping to show you today. So if you want to create shadows with something, you know, do you want to add black or gray or its complement to help it? And so that's what we're doing with this little square today. Or this little cube rather, I'm going to be using red. And now it's not going to be the most beautiful artwork because this is all about learning purposes, right? So it's not going to look even as shaded as it does here in the drawing. I prefer the sphere because I just like how it looks softer. That's a me thing. It's just a me thing. So I end up also doing the spheres, and I use yellow on that because that is a perfect example of why sometimes it's better to mix a complement to create those shadows versus adding black to a color or gray to a color, because like I've mentioned in the previous videos, when you're using yellow, sometimes you can end up with a green tint. And so you'll see the magic when it happens when we do that. But I did do the cube because I felt like if you wanted to kind of follow along with the video or, you know, watch it and then pause and go back, doing the cube is a little easier as far as the technique of mixing, and that'll make sense when we get into it, versus the way that I mix my colors to do the sphere and how I mix my colors just in life now. After doing this for so many years, it's just a much more intuitive process for me, and I'm just happier doing it that way. So I didn't want to confuse anybody with all of that. So without further ado, let's jump in and take a look at how all of these different things mix differently for different effects. And that will give you a lot more control over your artwork. And yeah, let's just jump in. So I've used Bristol paper for the last videos as well, but I did end up going to Jerry's Artarama and getting this Soho Bristol paper, which is a little less expensive, so that I wouldn't be using the more expensive paper for all of these demo purposes. It is a little bit smoother than what I used in the last couple videos, but it definitely serves the purpose and it works. And it did take me a minute to kind of get adjusted to the smoothness of the surface, but I'm just using this Soho Bristol paper. It works, it's good. You don't always have to buy the expensive stuff. So here's my first cube. I'm basically doing 1-inch squares and then creating the cubes from there. So I am lining up my initial square. I had wanted to do kind of a demo on how to create these cubes, and I wanted to get really technical with it for you guys. But honestly, what I discovered is that once I had my square, it was honestly easier for me to just eyeball it. I tried a few different times to try to come up with some kind of measurements and everything else. And I don't know if it was just me getting in my head too much, but seriously, when I just went in and eyeballed, you know, the lines, it just went a lot easier. Basically, you want to make sure that the lines that you're drawing across from each other on the sides are parallel to each other to create that sort of cube shape. And again, keep in mind, this doesn't have to be perfect. This is not to turn in for an art class, a college course. You don't even have to show anybody else. We are just learning how to mix the paints here. So don't do like me and get too in your head about it. And you'll even be able to see that my two cubes right here don't look anything alike. I think I actually ended up going back and adjusting the other one as well. But that's basically what we're doing. We're going to make 4 cubes. And then for the shadows, we're going to bring some lines down. Again, make sure that those 2 lines are parallel to each other as you do this. Keeping the lines parallel to each other is what really kind of gives it that edgy effect and makes it all a little more consistent. So here we are. This was my take 2, I believe, of my cubes. That's why you don't have the shadow lines yet. Like I said, I got really in my head about this. Don't take the time to do that. It's not that serious. Just get your cubes on the paper and get ready to mix paint. Now I am going in and I am labeling these just like I labeled in the previous videos. So I'm doing my grayscale on the first one, which is going to be my black and white. And then I'm doing the shade, which is a red plus the black, because we're using red. So any color plus black. Your tone is going to be whatever color you're using plus gray. So here again, red plus gray. And this is basically to help me remember what I'm doing and also for future reference, right? And then we're doing our complement in the last one, which is red plus green in this case. Red and green are opposite each other on the color wheel. So this is great, especially when you're starting out, to kind of be able to reference back when you're done and see what those different colors do. So here I finally got my little shadow boxes. You can see one goes off the edge. Again, it's okay. And I did also do my spheres on the bottom. Ignore those for now. We will come back to that later. I just wanted to make sure I had space. So to get started, we just need our clean water, a towel to wipe our brushes off with, a palette knife. Here's my lovely, very used palette knife, and a brush. I'm just using sort of a smaller, flat brush for this because I feel like that's going to be the best thing to use. So for our first square, we're doing black and white. So I've got my black and white paint, right? And I'm going to go ahead and mix what I think is a medium gray. And this is what you're going to be doing across the board, right? Just kind of find that middle ground between the black and white and get that middle gray tone. Now, if you want to use this same gray for the shading aspect or for the toning aspect of this, you might want to mix a little bit more. It just depends on the paint that you're using. If you have something to keep it in so that it doesn't dry out before you're ready for it, all those things. But anytime you're mixing paint, you want to make sure that you are not seeing any streaks of one or the other color or paint that you're using. So basically you can still see how there's a lot of white streaks and black streaks in this. So I'm just going to keep mixing, keep folding until I have one solid gray color. And then if I'm happy with that, then I'm going to use that. But I'm not going to add any more paint to it either way until I have everything completely mixed, because that's how you know you've got the color you're looking for, once all of those colors are completely mixed in. So there is my gray. And then I have my black straight out of the tube and my white straight out of the tube as well. So for our grayscale box, we are doing this a little bit differently than what we're going to do with the red boxes or whatever color you're using. So I'm going in with that gray that I just mixed. So that kind of neutral gray on the side of the box, because the idea here is that the light is coming from the top of the cube. So the top of the cube is going to be a little bit lighter. And then of course the front then needs to be a little bit darker. And then the shadow needs to be even darker than that. So if we start with the black on the side, the original color straight out of the tube, as we do when we do the red, we're not going to have any place to go with that. So hopefully that makes sense. And if it doesn't quite, then once we get into those red boxes, it will make a little bit more sense. So, so this is our mid gray that we mixed, and I'm already at this point, I think I'm realizing it's probably a little too dark. I was trying to trust the process. Ultimately, I do wish I had mixed everything up a little bit lighter than I did. I don't know. I don't know if I was distracted. I don't know if I was just like in the zone of getting the paint on the paper. Who knows? But you can see me trying to be a perfectionist because I did wobble over the lines as well. So that's all fixable later down the road. So Now I'm taking some of that middle gray that we previously mixed, and I'm separating it into two because I need one part of it to go a little lighter and one part of it to go a little darker. If you just start mixing everything into that one batch, then you're going to have to keep mixing and keep adding paint. So dividing it is just the easiest way and the most frugal way, not to be using a boatload of paint, right? So to one, I'm going to add a little bit more white and lighten that up some. And that's going to go on the top of the box. Again, making sure you mix everything completely thoroughly. I mean, you could see that big white streak that just kind of came out from underneath the palette knife. And right here, it looks quite a bit lighter than it does on the paper, right? And so, and even getting it down initially, I think I thought it was quite a bit lighter, but this is just one of those things like that acrylic paint likes to dry just a little bit darker than what it looks like when it's mixed. And I think I was going way too subtly with this. So when you see it in real life and up close, it looks fine, but definitely on the camera, there's not a ton of contrast. Again, this is how we learn, right? So it looks like a good bit of contrast. And this is another example too of when you are not sure of doing like maybe a little patch test, a little swatch test before you go into like a really large area and take all that time to fill that in and then end up frustrated, right? Because then you have to go back over it. The great thing about acrylic paint is that yes, you can go back over it and it will cover really well. But you know, in something little like this, it's not a big deal. Like I could easily go back and correct. But you know, if you're doing a larger piece, obviously more time consuming, more materials, etc. So I am just adding a little bit more black to the other gray that I had separated out and darkening that up some. And you can see me adding a little bit more, trying to create that contrast. Mix, mix, mix until it's all blended beautifully. And then that's going to go on the front of our cube. And I think part of my hesitation was in knowing that the darkest needed to be in the shadows, and I was trying hard not to make any of the sides just too dark, right? Straight up black out of the tube. So here I'm taking just a little bit of that mid gray and adding it to my black so that there's still a little, it feels like there's a little bit of depth. I honestly don't know how much difference that probably made because black paint is very overpowering. But, and if you wanted to do the tube for the shadow part just to see what that looks like, you absolutely could. And again, keep in mind, like I said before, the shadowing on these cubes is not something, like if I were doing this for an actual finished piece of artwork, I would definitely spend more time on it and do it a little bit differently, have a little more graduation in the light to the dark, especially on the shadow parts, because these end up being very flat rectangles. And if you were really shading it for a project, there are other techniques involved, kind of like how you saw in the pencil drawing, my quick sketch of that. But you can see kind of the difference between the light and dark. We're getting the ideas here. So now for the red boxes, we're going to work a little bit smarter, not harder, and we're going to make sure that we get the red color straight out of the tube on the side of all of our boxes first, just like that. Then we are going to go in with clean water and we're going to add a little bit of a white tint to that red for the top of the boxes. Voila. That way that part is done. So now we're going to go in for our first one with our shade, and we're going to add just a tiny little bit of black to our red. Remember that black paint is going to be a little bit overpowering, so less is more in the beginning. I'm not going to spend a ton of time instructing the color mixing at this point, since I've already covered that in the other videos and I don't want you guys to get bored. But here we go. I'm happy with that, and we're going to add that to the front of our box. Now, if you are using a paint that is a little more translucent, you might want to end up doing a couple of layers of this But this, once it gets on the paper, I end up being pretty happy with it. And again, this is just to gather the concept and effect of how these things will work. So then again, we're going to add just a little bit more black paint to the red and black that we've already mixed to make that a little bit darker. And once it's all beautifully mixed, I'm not happy with it. So apparently I added a little bit more. This is what happens when you're voiceovering a video you filmed a month ago because you were sick and you can't remember what you did. But there we go. So I'm happy with that. That is dark enough. And I ended up just using that. And we're going to paint that onto our shadow area. Right there. Fill in that in. And again, here it looks so dark. In real life, when I look at it, it's not quite as dark. That little spot going to drive me crazy. So I do end up filling that back in. It's the Virgo in me. What are you going to do? But now you can see the difference between the black and white and the red and black and what that does. So we're going to get back into our other two boxes, do the same kind of thing. So if you still have some of that medium gray that you mixed from before, that's great. Use that. If not, you may have to mix another gray. If it's not exactly like the medium gray that you used in the very first cube, it is totally okay. But here you can see how the gray already softens that red a little bit more than when we just added the black to it, right? So we end up having something that's just a little bit of a softer effect. And then again, we're going to go in and add more of the gray. We're not adding any more black to make that shadow darker. We're just going to continue adding that medium gray that we mixed and add it to the red where you already added some medium gray into it. So this is all about the process of using those tones. And you can see how adding that gray, it just creates a softer effect. So if you're creating a painting where you want softer shadows, you would use your toning technique. If you wanted a painting where you had more dramatic shadows, you would add black to your paint to make it a little darker, right? So this is what the whole process is about. So here we're just going to keep adding the darker gray until we're happy with it, or the medium gray rather. And that is how you begin really kind of seeing the difference in the color tones and the potential for this. And you could obviously, of course, within the same piece of artwork, use multiple techniques, right? Don't feel like you have to choose one for your piece of artwork. You can obviously use several techniques in one piece of art, right? So now we're going to get into our complementary color. I am mixing my own green. I'm happy with that green. Again, not going to go too far into that because I covered all of that stuff in detail in the other videos. Don't want to make you bored, but you will notice that when we have our green and our red, that is our neutral, we start getting sort of a brownish tone to it, right? Sort of a brownish hint of color to it. And so that's what we're putting on the front. And then again, just going to add more of that complement into what we already mixed. Now you can really see where it just looks brown. And again, once we get it on that paper, it looks so different than it does even on the palette. Things to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to get into our sphere painting. We have our cubes done, and I'm going to show you my grayscale one, how I do that, and then I'm gonna kind of zip through the others because you get the gist of the idea. So after all of these years of paint mixing and learning all of these things, I basically just go in, and you'll see this, I mix a lot on my palette. Now, this is why I didn't want to necessarily show this way of mixing the paint. I wanted to use the cubes because I feel like if you're following along, that's just a lot more structured. So you can really see what the colors do as you mix them versus this, where it's more of a mixing on the palette and mixing on the paper and kind of going back and forth and just blending in that way. It honestly, it gives it kind of a texture that I am fond of. You may not love it, but this is how I like to paint, just sort of more free, kind of zoning out into the painting process of it. it is a lot of back and forth. It's not super precise. It might make some of you absolutely nuts. If so, I do apologize, but this is how I have gotten to where I like to blend and mix my colors. This is why I didn't want to necessarily show this. I hope that makes sense now. Now on the very bottom of the sphere, I will say this, that's where I go the darkest, that very thin line. I actually go darker at the very bottom than even on the shadow. And that just creates kind of that definition between your object and the shadow that you're creating. But it's the same general idea, still going from the lightest. This is the idea that the light is coming from kind of the side and top of that round shape and how that's going to kind of create those shadows at the bottom. And really, I just wanted to do this because I wanted to do it and I thought it would be fun. And I did want to show you guys how it would look once we got into that yellow paint and why sometimes the best option is to use the colors complement. Because I know when we did the complement video, or when I did the complement video, I was kind of expressing my dislike for some of those colors, but they are useful, and here's how. So this is my violet that I mixed. It's kind of a nice neutral red plus blue violet, and I did also add some white to it just to kind of lighten it up a little bit so that the color would be easier to see on the paper versus that really dark straight out of the tube violet. So I'm using that to mix with my last yellow. All right, so here are all of the spheres together, right? And here we have our grayscale, which is just the black and white, trying to create those shadows and depths. And then we have the shade, which is our yellow plus our black. And, you know, you get the idea of some shadowing going on, but you can definitely see where we've got those green sort of tones in there, right? Where you've got that green sort of shimmer. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's fine, right? If that serves the purpose for your artwork, that's great. And then we have here the yellow and the gray, which is our tone. And so you can see how it's a little bit softer, right? It creates a little bit of a softer effect than the full-on black, kind of toned down a little bit, but still you have that very green tint. And then we have our complement, where we mixed the yellow and the violet. And did you expect it to come out so soft? Right? And so this gives a much more neutral sort of feel to it because, again, when you mix your complements together, it creates neutral tones. So it just creates a much softer effect, right? So that is the general idea here, and just kind of a close-up of these again as well. So again, the whole idea, gosh, I really do wish I had gone lighter on that. So if you're doing this, go way lighter than I did. So the whole general idea is whatever effect you're trying to create with your artwork, whatever theme you have going on with it, whatever, you know, you're trying to express in a particular work of art, it's just different techniques. One is not inherently better than the other, and it's just a matter of learning different techniques, knowing different ways, and what to expect when you mix those colors, and when you mix those shades and shadows together, right? That's the whole idea here, is to know what the colors, what the paint is going to do when you mix it so that you have more control over your artwork, and that ultimately is very freeing and makes it a lot more fun. So I hope you guys found that helpful and informational, and I hope that gives you a little more sense of control when it comes to your paint mixing and paint mixing choices and options. Let me know if you've enjoyed this little Color 101 mixing theory series. I can't even remember what I called it now, but I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this as far as technique goes. It's been fun for me to kind of get outside of the crafty things and sort of revisit some of the technical things and technical aspects. I have found it very calming and soothing. I do have a couple of other paint videos that I want to share with you guys. Hopefully we all in this house stay healthy and no more interruptions, and so it won't be so long before the next video comes out. And of course I'll do some other crafty crafty things coming up soon. Spring is around the corner, so we'll see what I can come up with and find there. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out. If you're not already a subscriber, I hope you'll consider subscribing and hanging out with us some more to do all of the creative and crafty things. Go forth, create, have a great day, stay healthy. See you guys soon.